All right then, I'm going on the trip with my mom. You'll stay home, okay? I was completely speechless. But this is the prize I won in the contest, you know. Besides, if the winner doesn't use the ticket, it becomes invalid. I tried to explain, but before I could finish, my husband, Mike, interrupted with something shocking. If you don't like it, we can get a divorce. Excuse me? I'm saying that if you can't go along with what I want, we'll get a divorce. In that moment, whatever affection I had for my husband vanished. My name is Sasha, a 30-year-old office worker. I attended an all-girls school from middle school through university and entered the workforce without ever having a proper conversation with a man. My job kept me so busy that I never had time to fall in love, and before I knew it, I was 25. Realizing I needed to change this, a friend arranged a blind date for me. That's how I met my first boyfriend, a freelancer who lied about being an office worker. Soon after we started dating, he became unemployed, and I realized he intended to depend entirely on me. I broke up with him as soon as I could. After that experience, I became even more distrustful of men and found it hard to believe in them. That's how I ended up reaching 30 without another relationship. My parents were more worried about my situation than I was. Both my father and mother had already been married for several years by the time they were my age, so they were growing increasingly impatient. While getting married in your 30s is common nowadays, back then, 25 was considered the latest acceptable age to tie the knot. Concerned about my lack of a boyfriend or partner, my father started bringing me several arranged marriage proposals, insisting that if I couldn't find someone on my own, he would help me. At first, I repeatedly turned down his offers, but over time, I began to feel guilty about rejecting the efforts my father made on my behalf. I could sense how much both of my parents, especially as their only daughter, wished for my happiness. That's when I decided to take a more positive approach and agreed to go on a blind date, partly to show my gratitude to my parents. It was during one of these blind dates that I met Mike, who would later become my husband. Mike, like me, was 30 years old. He had attended an all-boys school his entire life and, like me, had never had much experience with relationships. What stood out to me about Mike was his deep sense of responsibility toward his parents. He took great care of them, visiting their home regularly, planning trips for them, and even joining them on these vacations. He seemed to have a kind personality and a stable job at a reputable company. I carefully examined Mike's business card, making sure everything was legitimate. I was especially cautious this time, having learned from my previous relationship. Despite my caution and thorough checking, nothing seemed off about Mike. I convinced myself he was trustworthy, and we continued dating. Mike took the lead in our relationship, understanding my shyness, and always treated me with great care. As time went on, I found myself increasingly drawn to him. After 2 years of dating, Mike proposed, and we got married. When my parents heard the news, they were overwhelmed with joy, shedding tears of happiness. I felt fortunate not only to have met a good man, but also to have brought such happiness to my parents. After our wedding, we went on our honeymoon and began our life together as a married couple. Since we both worked, we shared the household chores. Cooking wasn't Mike's strong suit, so I handled that while he took care of the laundry and cleaning. We had a balanced relationship and supported each other, enjoying what I believed was a happy married life. However, everything changed just 1 year into our marriage. It all began when my father-in-law passed away after a battle with illness. After his father's death, Mike became increasingly attentive to his mother, Bianca, who was now alone. On his days off, he would visit Bianca at her house, and the two of them would sometimes go out together without me. Sometimes, Mike would stop by Bianca's house after work and have dinner with her, leaving me to eat alone. On occasion, he even went on trips with just her. I remember one morning seeing him leave the house with a travel bag, and I naively asked if he was heading out on a business trip. To my surprise, he casually replied, "No, I'm traveling with my mother to New York." I was shocked. First, I couldn't believe he planned a trip without informing me. Even more baffling was that he seemed content to keep it a secret unless I asked. I couldn't understand how he could care so much for his mother while completely disregarding his wife's feelings. It wasn't that he ignored me entirely, but this behavior felt like more than just being family-oriented. It was as if he was overly attached to his mother. Despite my growing concerns, Mike showed no intention of changing his attitude or lifestyle. In fact, I don't think Mike even realizes how wrong his behavior is. Despite my concerns, I decided to compromise and stick it out, accepting that this was just how he was. If we divorced after only 1 year of marriage, it would devastate my parents. Besides, I thought if we had a child, maybe Mike's attitude would change. Divorce isn't something to take lightly, so I spent my days trying to make the best of things. To distract myself, I decided to take up a hobby. I recently became hooked on entering contests and winning prizes. It was surprisingly fun. I started entering various contests, winning items like cosmetics and food, and writing reviews. Then, one day, I won something much bigger, a pair of airline tickets to Guam. I was so shocked that I reread the email 3 times, unable to believe I had actually won such a grand prize. I carefully checked the details to make sure it wasn't a scam. There were no suspicious links or requests for my credit card number. It was real. I had genuinely won a trip to Guam. But then, I faced a dilemma. Who should I take? My husband had just returned from a trip to New York with Bianca. Should I ask a friend or maybe my parents? Then it struck me. I decided to give the tickets to my parents so they could enjoy a well-deserved vacation. Excited, I went to their house and shared the news. It's been years since we traveled abroad. Are you sure about this, Sasha? You won this, my parents said. It's okay. I want to spoil you both for once, I insisted. Seeing their happiness brought me so much joy. But then my dad noticed something. Sasha, this ticket is valid only for the person who won it. It's non-transferable and you can't gift it. What? So I can't give it to you both? I was disappointed. Well, it seems that's the case. But you won it, honey, so why don't you go with Mike? My parents suggested. Reluctantly, I decided to take the trip with my husband. But when I returned home that night, I found a woman's coat by the front door. The coat looked familiar. It was Bianca's. When I walked into the living room, there she was, sitting on the couch, watching TV. Oh, Sasha, you're home. What were you doing out so late? It's your day off, Bianca said casually. I stood there, taken aback. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were here, Bianca, I replied, trying to mask my surprise. Oh, what are you trying to say? Is it wrong for me to visit my son's house? Bianca snapped. No, it's not, I replied, though I couldn't help but feel that Bianca had been kinder to me when my father-in-law was still alive. Since his passing, her attitude had become colder and more critical. Bianca's eyes then landed on the bag I was carrying. What's this? What did you buy? She asked. Inside the bag was a guidebook for our trip to Guam, which I had picked up on my way home. Oh, it's nothing, I said, trying to downplay it. Just show it to me. Huh? Why? Just show it, she insisted, snatching the bag from me before I could react. Guam? Are you just trying to treat yourself? What are you doing with Mike's earnings? I was stunned. What was she talking about? I won a pair of travel tickets in a contest, so I thought I would go on the trip with my husband, I explained. Oh, really? A prize, huh? Bianca's demeanor suddenly shifted, and she seemed almost excited. I had a bad feeling about where this was heading. Just then, my husband walked into the living room, fresh from a bath. Oh, Sasha, you're back. What's going on? I heard my mother's excited voice from the bathroom. Mikey, listen. Sasha won a trip to Guam in a contest, Bianca announced gleefully. Wow, that's great, Mike said, sounding genuinely pleased. Yeah, I replied, so I thought we could go together. I even bought a guidebook. How many people can go on that trip? He asked. It's a pair of tickets, so just the 2 of us, I answered. Mike paused, then glanced at Bianca. Her eyes widened, almost pleadingly, like a dog waiting for a treat. Okay, well then, I'm going to go on the trip with my mom. You stay home, okay? Huh? I was completely speechless. I hadn't realized Mike was this much of a mama's boy. This is the prize I won, I tried to argue. So what? We're a couple. What's yours is mine, and what's mine is my mom's, Mike said with a twisted sense of logic. No way. Besides, you and Bianca just went on a trip a few weeks ago. That has nothing to do with this. That trip was domestic, and Mike paid for it. We haven't been on an overseas trip in years. Bianca interjected, already planning their vacation. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Hey, I didn't even agree that you 2 would be the ones going on this trip. Besides, the ticket would be invalid if the winner isn't there, I tried to explain. But before I could finish, Mike cut me off with something outrageous. If you don't like it, then we'll get a divorce. Excuse me? I said, if you can't listen and obey what I say, then we'll get a divorce. I never thought he would say that. Any affection I had left for him vanished instantly. Fine, do whatever you want, I replied coldly. Then why didn't you just say so sooner? You're so selfish, Mike snapped back, looking triumphant alongside Bianca, as if they had won some sort of battle. They eagerly started planning their trip together, using the guidebook they had taken from me, while I began considering my post-divorce plans. Later, my husband told me to contact the airline to confirm the trip, so I did as he asked. But I had a different plan. I asked the operator, am I allowed to give these tickets to my husband or any other relatives if I can't go? The operator replied, sorry, but the tickets are non-transferable, even to family members or relatives. That makes sense, I said. In that case, I'd like to decline the airline tickets I won in the contest. After hanging up, I turned to my husband and said, the tickets are void. We're not going anywhere. I handed the tickets to my husband and said, here are the tickets. Please make sure to check the terms and conditions. He scoffed, dismissing my words. I don't need to read any terms and conditions, he said, leaving the tickets on the shelf without a second glance. It probably never even crossed his mind that those tickets might be invalid. Afterward, I confided in my parents. I asked for their help because I planned to move out of the house on the very day Mike and Bianca were supposed to leave for their trip. My father was stunned when he heard what had happened. I never imagined Mike was this kind of person, he said, clearly shaken. My father had been the one who suggested the arranged marriage with Mike, so he felt responsible. It's not your fault, Dad, I reassured him. He only started showing his true colors recently. Don't blame yourself. I tried to calm him down, not wanting him to carry any guilt. The day of the trip finally arrived. Mike was in high spirits, eagerly preparing to leave. I, too, was looking forward to seeing how he and Bianca would react at the airport. Well, I'm off then. Take care of the house while I'm gone, Mike said, grinning widely. Yeah, have fun, I replied with an equally big smile, which seemed to catch him off guard. He left, a little surprised by my cheerful send-off. As soon as he was gone, my parents arrived to help me move out. We loaded my belongings into their car and headed to the new apartment I had found. It was close to my office, and I had secured it as soon as I decided I'd had enough of my marriage. The apartment was quiet and comfortable, a perfect place to start over. A couple of hours later, my phone rang. It was Mike. Hello. Hey, what's going on? They're saying our airline tickets are invalid. Yes, that's right, I replied calmly. If the winner doesn't accompany the trip, the tickets are invalid. What? You never told me that. I did. I told you to check the terms and conditions. It's all written there. You've got to be kidding me. I didn't read that. Well, that's your fault for not reading it, I said, my voice steady. It's like someone getting sued and claiming they didn't know the law. But what am I supposed to do now? I already booked a hotel in Guam. Like I said, it's none of my business anymore. You and Bianca can sort it out. I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of finality. 10 minutes later, Mike called again. What now? I asked, already exasperated. Why can't I pay with your card? My card? What do you mean? I asked, confusion creeping in. The card you're using as a sub, he said, his voice tinged with panic. I quickly checked my drawers and realized that my secondary credit card was missing. You took my card without asking. I was only borrowing it for a little while, he stammered. But the airline staff said I can't use it. Are you serious? If you're not the owner of the card, you can't use it. But on the internet. Internet? What are you even talking about? I was growing more frustrated by the second. Mike suddenly went silent, then muttered, "Oh, well, no," before hanging up. I stared at the phone, disbelief washing over me. No way. I immediately checked my credit card statement and found a list of charges I had no recollection of making. Then it hit me. My husband had been buying a lot of clothes and other things recently. He must have used my card without my permission. Furious, I canceled the card and took a screenshot of the statement history, determined to confront him later. A few days after his 3-day, 2-night trip to Guam, my husband called. "What's going on?" he demanded. "All your stuff is gone, and you left divorce papers on the table." "What the hell are you thinking?" "I'm thinking exactly what you think," I replied calmly. "I can't live with a mama's boy who prioritizes his mother over his wife. and a thief who uses my credit card without permission. What? If you won't sign the divorce papers, we'll end up in court, I added. Court? Are you crazy? If people at work find out, then I'll request the divorce through my lawyer, I said, cutting him off. So you'd better cooperate quietly. Realizing he had no way out, my husband reluctantly agreed to the divorce on the condition that there would be no division of property and that he would repay all the credit card charges he had made without my consent. But my plan for justice didn't end there. I didn't have to spread the word about what happened. The news traveled fast enough on its own. My ex-husband soon called me, panicked. This isn't what we agreed on, he shouted. Everyone at work knows what happened. They're all calling me a mama's boy and a thief. I can't even show my face at the office anymore. Oh, what a shame, I replied, feigning sympathy. But I didn't say a word. Did you forget how many people were involved in setting up our marriage? The connection that had arranged our marriage was through my father, a general manager at his company, and my ex-husband's boss, a department head. They were great friends, and our blind date was arranged because my ex-husband's boss thought highly of him. But when the boss found out how my ex-husband had treated me, he was furious. As a result, my ex-husband was removed from the fast track in his career and became a pariah at work. Bianca didn't escape unscathed either. Word of her behavior spread through the neighborhood, and now everyone avoids her. She's become a recluse, trapped by her own actions. As for me, I threw myself into my work and earned a promotion, along with a raise. To celebrate, I took my parents on a long-awaited trip to Italy, where we made wonderful memories together. Although this experience was tough, I've learned a lot from it. I'm ready to find a better man and start a new chapter in my life. It's hard to believe my ex-husband turned out to be not just a mama's boy, but also a thief. There's nothing more anyone can do for him. I'm glad my family and I were able to bond and enjoy our trip to Italy. I'm confident that, with my family's support, I'll find someone truly deserving of my love. Thank you for reading until the end. Please subscribe to our channel, and we hope to see you in our next video.
Jack's bachelor party had been planned for weeks. He had invited all of his closest friends to come celebrate his last night of freedom before getting married to Sarah. They started off with a fancy dinner at a trendy restaurant where they all enjoyed a nice steak and a few drinks.
But the real party was just getting started.
They headed to a popular nightclub where the music was loud and the drinks were flowing. Jack was having the time of his life, laughing and joking with his friends. He couldn't believe how lucky he was to have such amazing friends and to be marrying Sarah, the woman of his dreams. But as the night wore on, things got wilder. One of Jack's friends suggested they head to a strip club, and before he knew it, they were all piling into a limo and heading to the seedy part of town. At the strip club, the guys bought drinks and made it rain with dollar bills as the strippers danced on stage. Jack was having a good time, but he wasn't interested in any of the women. That is, until he saw her. She was different from the other strippers, with a wild look in her eyes and a body that seemed to defy gravity. She made her way over to Jack's table and introduced herself as Candy. They struck up a conversation, and before long, they were making out in a private booth. Jack knew he shouldn't be doing this, that he was engaged to Sarah, and this was a huge mistake, but he couldn't resist Candy's seductive charms. They ended up back at his hotel room, and before he knew it, they were in bed together. As he lay there afterwards, Jack felt a sense of guilt and shame wash over him. He had just cheated on the woman he loved more than anything in the world. He knew he had to tell Sarah, but he didn't know how. The wedding was only a day away, and he didn't want to ruin everything, but he also knew that he couldn't keep this secret forever. Jack woke up on the day of his wedding with a heavy heart. He knew he had cheated on Sarah the night before, and the guilt was weighing on him. He hoped that he could put it behind him and move on, but the memory of what he had done kept creeping into his mind. As he got ready for the wedding, he couldn't help but feel like a fraud. He was putting on a suit and tie, pretending that everything was okay when in reality, he had betrayed the woman he loved. He knew he had to tell Sarah, but he didn't want to ruin the wedding day. When he arrived at the church, he was greeted by his groomsmen, all of whom were in high spirits. They slapped him on the back and congratulated him, but Jack couldn't bring himself to smile. "You look nervous, man," said his best man, Dave. "Don't worry, everything's gonna be great." Jack nodded, but his stomach was tied in knots. He just wanted to get through the ceremony and deal with the fallout afterwards. As Sarah walked down the aisle, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. She looked beautiful in her white dress, and he knew that he was the luckiest man in the world to be marrying her. But at the same time, he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't deserve her. During the vows, Jack tried to focus on what he was saying, but his mind kept drifting. He couldn't stop thinking about what he had done, and the guilt was eating away at him. After the ceremony, there was a reception at a nearby hotel. Jack tried to put on a brave face, but he knew that he was just going through the motions. He danced with Sarah and smiled for the cameras, but he felt like a fraud. At one point, Sarah pulled him aside.
"Jack, is everything okay?"
she asked. "You seem distant?" Jack hesitated. He wanted to tell her everything, but he didn't want to ruin the day. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said, forcing a smile. "I'm just a little nervous, that's all." Sarah looked at him skeptically, but didn't press the issue. Jack knew that he had to tell her the truth, but he didn't know when or how. The wedding day had turned into a nightmare, and he knew that things were only going to get worse. Jack and Sarah had planned a luxurious honeymoon to a tropical island. They had both been looking forward to it for months, but Jack couldn't shake the guilt he felt for cheating on her before the wedding. He hoped that the trip would help them reconnect, and that he could finally find a way to tell her the truth. As they settled into their private villa, Jack couldn't help but feel like a fraud. He was sitting on the beach with the woman he loved, but he had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Sarah sensed that something was off and tried to get Jack to open up.
"Jack, is everything okay?"
she asked. "You've been distant ever since the wedding." Jack hesitated, not knowing how to tell her the truth. "I'm just tired from all the wedding planning." Sarah didn't seem convinced, but decided not to push the issue. As the days passed, Jack tried to enjoy the honeymoon, but he couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. They went on romantic walks on the beach, swam in the ocean, and enjoyed candlelit dinners. But Jack couldn't enjoy any of it. One night, as they were lying in bed, Sarah brought up the subject again.
"Jack, I feel like there's something you're not telling me," she said. "Please, just be honest with me."
Jack took a deep breath and decided to come clean.
"Sarah, there's something I need to tell you,"
he said, looking at her with tears in his eyes.
"The night before the wedding, I cheated on you."
Sarah's face went blank, and for a moment she didn't say anything.
"How could you do this to me?"
she finally said, her voice shaking with anger and hurt.
"I don't know,"
Jack replied.
"I was drunk, and it was a mistake. I never meant to hurt you."
Sarah got out of bed and started pacing back and forth.
"I can't believe this," she said. "You cheated on me the night before our wedding. How could you do this to us?"
Jack didn't know what to say. He had hoped that telling her the truth would make things better, but he had only made things worse. As the days of the honeymoon passed, the tension between them grew. They still tried to enjoy the beautiful surroundings, but there was an underlying sense of betrayal and hurt that hung over them like a dark cloud. After returning from the honeymoon, Jack and Sarah tried to work through the aftermath of the affair. Sarah was devastated, and Jack felt like he had ruined everything. They went to couples therapy and tried to talk through their feelings, but the trust between them had been broken. One day, Sarah received a message from a mutual friend who had attended Jack's bachelor party.
"Sarah, I need to tell you something," the message read. "At Jack's bachelor party, he didn't just cheat on you once. He was with multiple women that night."
Sarah was stunned. She couldn't believe that Jack had lied to her, not only about cheating on her, but also about the extent of his infidelity. she confronted Jack about it. "Is it true?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "Did you cheat on me with multiple women?" Jack hesitated, not knowing what to say. He had hoped that they could move past the initial affair, but now he knew that he had to tell her the truth. "Yes, it's true," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I was a coward for not telling you the truth." Sarah was livid. She couldn't believe that the man she had loved and trusted had betrayed her so completely. "How could you do this to me?" she yelled. "I can't even look at you right now." Jack knew that he had messed up, but he was determined to make things right. "I know I screwed up, Sarah," he said, "but please let me make it up to you. I'll do anything." Sarah didn't know what to do. Part of her wanted to forgive Jack and work through their problems, but another part of her couldn't imagine ever trusting him again. "You need to give me some time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this." Jack knew that he had a long road ahead of him if he wanted to win back Sarah's trust. He was determined to do whatever it took to make things right, but he knew that it wouldn't be easy. The revelation of his infidelity had changed everything, and he knew that there was no going back to the way things were before. Sarah had been devastated by Jack's betrayal, but over time, she began to feel a different kind of emotion: anger. She couldn't believe that he had cheated on her, lied to her, and put her through so much pain. She began to think about ways to get revenge. At first, Sarah didn't know what to do. She didn't want to stoop to Jack's level, but she also didn't want to let him off the hook for what he had done. One day, she came up with an idea. She began to document everything that Jack had done to her. She saved screenshots of the text messages he had sent to the other women, recorded their phone conversations, and took pictures of the places they had gone together. She wanted to have proof of everything he had done so that she could use it against him if she ever needed to. One day, Sarah got a call from Jack's boss. He told her that Jack had been fired from his job for misconduct with a coworker. Sarah was stunned, but not surprised. She knew that Jack's behavior was catching up with him. Feeling emboldened, Sarah decided to put her revenge plan into action. She created a fake social media account and began messaging the other women who had been with Jack. She pretended to be one of his ex-girlfriends and asked them for details about their relationships with him. Some of the women were hesitant to talk, but others were more than happy to share. Sarah compiled all of the information she had gathered and created a website dedicated to exposing Jack's infidelity. She posted screenshots of their conversations, photos of the places they had gone, and even recordings of their phone calls. She made sure to keep her identity hidden, but the website quickly went viral, and people began to share it all over social media. Jack was horrified when he found out. He couldn't believe that Sarah had gone to such lengths to get revenge. He begged her to take the website down and promised to do whatever it took to make things right. But Sarah was done with him. She had given him chances to come clean and make amends, but he had only continued to lie and cheat. In the end, Jack lost everything. He lost his job, his friends, and his reputation. Sarah had gotten her revenge, but it wasn't just about hurting him. She had also shown him that his actions had consequences and that he couldn't continue to treat people the way he had treated her. As for Sarah, she eventually moved on and found someone who truly loved and respected her. But she never forgot what Jack had done to her, and she made sure to always be true to herself and never let anyone treat her poorly again.
My name is Emma. I'm 32 years old, and I want to tell you a story that happened to me not too long ago. And I want people to learn from my experience and not make such silly mistakes. I'll start the story over. My husband had been looking forward to this business trip to Bali for weeks. He had been working long hours, putting in extra effort to make sure that everything was in order before he left. He promised me that he would stay in touch every day and send me pictures of his adventures. On the day of his departure, I could see the excitement in his eyes. He hugged me tightly and kissed me on the forehead before heading out the door. For the first few days, he kept his promise. He would send me pictures of the beautiful beaches, the incredible sunsets, and the exotic foods he was trying. I could see the excitement in his face, and I was happy for him. He deserved a break from his stressful job. However, as the days went by, I noticed that his messages became less frequent. At first, I didn't think too much of it. I figured that he was just busy with work and didn't have time to check in as often, but as the days turned into weeks, my concern grew. I tried to call him, but he wouldn't answer. I sent him messages, but he wouldn't respond. I started to worry that something was wrong. Then, one day, I received a message from my friend Sarah. She was also in Bali for work, and she had seen my husband there. She sent me a picture of them together, smiling and holding hands on the beach. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe they had just bumped into each other and were catching up. But as I looked closer, I realized that their body language was too intimate. They were standing too close, holding hands for too long. My heart sank as I realized what was going on. My husband was cheating on me, in Bali, with my own friend. The message from my friend Sarah sent me into a state of shock. My husband was cheating on me with my own friend while he was supposed to be on a business trip in Bali. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the picture spoke volumes. Their body language was too familiar, too intimate for me to ignore. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized what had been going on behind my back. I tried to confront my husband over the phone, but he wouldn't answer. I sent him messages, but he didn't respond. It was like he was avoiding me. My mind raced with thoughts and questions. How long had this been going on? Was this the first time he cheated on me? Why did he do it with my friend? I couldn't stand the uncertainty any longer. I knew I had to confront him face to face. I booked a ticket to Bali and flew out the next day. When I arrived, I went straight to his hotel. I knocked on his door, but he didn't answer. I pounded on it again and again, but still nothing. I decided to go to my friend Sarah's hotel. I needed answers. When I arrived, she was surprised to see me. "Hey, what are you doing here?" she asked. "I came to find out the truth," I said, "about you and my husband." Her face fell. "I'm so sorry," she said, tears in her eyes. "It was a mistake. We never meant for it to happen. How could you do this to me?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. "It just happened," she said. "We were both lonely, and we found comfort in each other's company." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My friend had betrayed me, and my husband had cheated on me. I felt like my world was falling apart. After the initial shock of discovering my husband's infidelity, I was consumed by anger and hurt. I couldn't believe that he had cheated on me, let alone with my own friend. But instead of wallowing in self-pity, I decided to take action. I knew that I couldn't just forgive and forget. I needed to get back at him, to make him feel the same pain that I was feeling. And so, I came up with a plan. I started by doing some research. I found out where my husband was staying and where he was going to be for the next few days. Then, I contacted a private investigator to help me gather more information about his whereabouts and actions during his trip. With the help of the private investigator, I learned that my husband had been seeing my friend Sarah for the entire 2 months that he was in Bali. They had been going on romantic dinners, holding hands on the beach, and even staying in the same hotel room. Armed with this information, I decided to confront my husband. But instead of just yelling and screaming at him, I wanted to make him feel the same pain that I was feeling. I wanted him to realize the gravity of his actions. So I came up with a plan to get revenge. I would pretend that everything was fine and that I had forgiven him. I would welcome him home with open arms and act like nothing had happened. But behind the scenes, I would be working to exact my revenge. I would hire an actor to play the role of a handsome, wealthy man who was interested in me. I would make sure that my husband saw us together and became jealous. I would also make sure that my husband's colleagues and friends knew about his infidelity. I would spread the word that he had cheated on me with my own friend, making sure that his reputation was tarnished. I knew that my plan was risky, but I was determined to make my husband pay for his betrayal. I was ready to do whatever it takes to get my revenge. As I waited for my husband's return, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction knowing that I had a plan for revenge. I had prepared for weeks and was ready to make him pay for his infidelity. When my husband finally returned home, he seemed surprised to see me waiting for him at the airport. I plastered a fake smile on my face and acted as if everything was fine. I hugged him tightly and pretended like I was happy to see him. Over the next few days, I continued to act as if everything was normal. I cooked his favorite meals, listened to his stories about his trip, and even made love to him as if nothing had happened. But behind the scenes, I was working on my plan. I had hired a handsome actor named Ryan to play the role of my new love interest. Ryan was charming, wealthy, and knew exactly how to make my husband jealous. I made sure that my husband saw Ryan and me together at public places, such as restaurants and coffee shops. I knew that this would make him feel uncomfortable and start to realize what he had lost. At the same time, I made sure that my husband's colleagues and friends knew about his infidelity. I spread the word about his affair with my friend Sarah, making sure that everyone knew what had happened. My husband started to become increasingly jealous of Ryan, and our relationship started to deteriorate. He would question me about my relationship with Ryan, but I would always tell him that he was just a friend. One day, I decided to take things up a notch. I invited my friend Sarah over to my house and asked my husband to join us for dinner. As we sat down to eat, I watched as my husband's face turned red with anger and jealousy. "Why did you invite her here?" he asked, pointing at Sarah. "I thought it would be nice to have a little get-together," I replied, acting oblivious to his anger. My husband stormed out of the room, and I followed him. As he paced back and forth, I could see the anger and frustration building inside of him. "Is there something going on between you and Ryan?" he asked, finally exploding. "No, of course not," I replied, acting innocent. "I don't believe you," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "I know that you're seeing him." "I'm not seeing anyone," I said, trying to remain calm. But deep down, I knew that my plan was working. My husband was finally starting to feel the same pain that I had felt when I discovered his affair. As the weeks went by, my husband's jealousy and anger continued to grow. Our relationship became more strained, and I could see that he was starting to regret his actions. Eventually, my husband came clean and apologized for his infidelity. He promised that he would never cheat on me again and begged for my forgiveness. Although I had achieved my revenge, I couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. I had accomplished what I set out to do, but at what cost? Our relationship was forever changed, and I knew that we would never be the same again. After my husband's confession and apology, I was left feeling conflicted. On one hand, I was glad that he had finally come clean and recognized the pain that he had caused me. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that our relationship was irreparably damaged. We decided to go to couples therapy to work through our issues, and although it was helpful, it was also incredibly difficult. It was painful to talk about his affair and the betrayal that I had felt. I had to confront the fact that the person who I had trusted the most had betrayed me in the worst possible way. But with time, we started to make progress. My husband continued to show remorse and take responsibility for his actions, and I started to let go of my anger and resentment. However, things were never quite the same. Even when we were able to laugh and enjoy each other's company, there was always an underlying tension. We both knew that we had been through something that would always be a part of our relationship. There were times when I found myself wondering if I would ever be able to fully trust my husband again. Even though he had apologized and promised to never cheat again, I couldn't help but wonder if he was capable of doing it again. Despite my doubts, we continued to work on our relationship. We made an effort to communicate more openly and honestly, and we worked hard to rebuild the trust that had been broken. Over time, our relationship started to heal. It was never perfect, but it was strong in its imperfection. We had been through a difficult journey, but we had come out the other side together. Looking back on the experience, I realized that sometimes the most painful moments in life can be the ones that teach us the most. I had learned about the importance of trust, communication, and forgiveness. And although I would never forget the pain of my husband's betrayal, I was grateful for the opportunity to grow and learn from it.
Toxic parents is a phrase that has literally burst into our lives. While earlier it was called the problem of fathers and children, which everyone seems to have, now the issue has reached a new level. The internet is full of articles and books describing toxic relationships, parental abuse, and the results of the presence of all this in our lives. To some, the problem seems almost made up. They say that children are growing up so infantile, selfish, and ungrateful. For others, such relationships with relatives have become a real tragedy. Anna, 36 years old, does not communicate with her mother for more than 6 years. For the first time in my life, I began to live without fear and realized that it was possible to be happy. Her friends called me and said, "Shame on you. It's Mom. You're just ungrateful." My mother was born in the 1950s, a very educated woman. She was raised by her aunts and grandmothers who had lost their children in the war. They thought that since the war had ruined their lives, at least let the child live. I don't care at all about the fact that she beat me as a child. It's easy to forgive. But she hit her parents. I can't forget that. Dad ran away a long time ago. He paid alimony, even though my mom said there was none. He tried to communicate with me, but my mother prevented it. Then he gave up trying. In our society, the system of protecting women from a psychopathic man is weak, but somehow it swings. But with regard to women, there is no way. The man has practically no chance of taking the child away. So I stayed with my mother. If my mom hates these movies, I'm going to hate them too. If my mom hates me, I'm going to hate me too. Who didn't know my mother very well thought of her as a super intelligent, well-mannered woman. I really wanted to interact with this version of her, kind, intelligent, but that's not what got to me. I was almost always the bad one. Abnormal, an idiot, a sack of shit. These words were common. I think she made up some kind of ideal for herself. When very occasionally I matched it, she even praised me, but mostly I was different from him. I wasn't even accepted as a B. She was extremely aggressive about me getting married. She didn't like my husband. She told me how to communicate with him better, which was to build and manipulate him. Also, I had become, in her opinion, a slut since I got pregnant. I live in Novosibirsk. She's in another city, but she called all the time, often came for a few days. She would say to me, "Oh, look at the love. He'll leave you anyway. You'll come crawling back on your knees." She was a sweetheart and a sweetheart to my husband. But as soon as he left for work, she let all the dogs down on me. When I was suffering from morning sickness, she brought a herring with her and started boiling it right in the pot with my head. I was vomiting from the smell, and she cornered me and started forcibly opening my mouth and shoving herring eyes into my mouth. During the 9 months of my pregnancy, I endured such an onslaught of anger and insults from her that by the time I gave birth, I began to lose my mind. I didn't think to stop communicating with her then because I had this thought in me. She's a mother, and a mother is sacred. I still wanted to build a good relationship with her. I had this illusion. It was my mother. Maybe she would understand me, see that we had a good family, and maybe be a good beloved grandmother, I dreamed. I used to bake bread when she came over. I wanted to make her happy, to reset the relationship, so to speak. My boy was born with severe malformations. The child has the most severe autism, among other diseases. My mother kept insulting not only me, but also the baby. She said that this bastard would ruin my life and that I had to get rid of him. She said, "Put him in an orphanage. Give him to your mother." In-law, if that fool wants a freak. During our last conversation on the phone, she started yelling something like that again. I had rarely argued with her before because I was always terrified of her, but this time she raised her voice. I told her to leave me alone and not to touch my son, and I reminded her that she had never had a quiet day during her pregnancy. She was shocked, so she started insulting me more. Then she threatened that since I dared to yell against her, she would not communicate with me until I asked for forgiveness. But at that moment, I realized that I needed to protect my family, so goodbye. I remember her words, "You'll understand how to live without Mom." And I knew how. It was easy to breathe. I'm 36 years old and I've only recently let go. I started working with a psychologist and I realized that I wasn't as horrible a jerk as I'd been led to believe. The decision to stop communicating was a conscious one. I just didn't have the strength anymore. She didn't call me either because of pride. Then somehow she found my phone, but I asked my husband not to pick up. She directed her friends who shamed me, said I was an ungrateful daughter, and almost demanded I apologize. We don't communicate for 6 years. There is no desire to resume the relationship. The first thing that changed immediately was a sharp improvement in my child's condition. Literally within a month, he started to notice things around him, and my tantrums stopped because there were no calls from her. I related it all. The baby used to have a very nervous mom who would get scolded harshly on the phone and be nervous all day long. And here Mom doesn't get scolded. She's smiling. I feel so much better. Although I confess even now I sometimes think, I wish I could share this with my mother. She would like this, that. But I understand that if I go back to that person, it would start all over again. She said so often that she was unlucky with her daughter. What do you mean, unlucky? As a mother of a disabled child, it seems to me that when you have a healthy child, it's a blessing that blows your mind. What more do you need? I was left with not resentment, but rather pain. The pain that this was in my family, with me, with my childhood, in my life. John, 26, tries to minimize contact with his parents. About 6 or 7 years ago, I left my hometown. In the first years, I somehow tried to establish a relationship, or rather to involve my parents in my life. Then I realized that they and I have a completely different understanding of many things. Sometimes my parents try to lead me into some sincere conversations, but when I start to tell them something, really sincerely talk to them and discuss things that bother me, including in our relationship, I feel that they do not understand me, and then mutual reproaches begin. All these attempts at some kind of sincere communication end up in a formal style of communication. Now I'm trying to bring the relationship closer to zero, to make it neutral, as between people who have their own lives. It's been building up for a long time. Since I was a child, they taught me to be independent. I was an ordinary kid. I was involved in clubs. They weren't really interested, and I didn't really let them into my life. I had no need for support. I always came home on time. I could always cook for myself, and I didn't have to beg my parents all the time. You could say so. And if I needed some clothes, for example, they saw for themselves because I was in front of them. When I left, I felt that I disappeared from their apartment, disappeared from direct sight, and their interest in me disappeared too. My parents had an opportunity to help me because in principle they allowed themselves to spend money on some non-essential things, so to speak. They could have fun, plan a vacation abroad, and in the meantime I needed 1/10 of what they were spending. I was on welfare. I had no way to support myself while I was studying. I stopped feeling that support, stopped feeling that my parents were somehow thinking about me. They only sent money on request. This amount was only enough for a short period of time, a week or two, for food and basic household needs. I had to borrow money and figure out ways to somehow survive the moment. Literally, winter came. I had no winter shoes. I called my parents, but it was not part of their plans. I told my parents about my life, about problems with my peers and so on. But I didn't see any interest from my parents, didn't hear any questions. What and how? When I graduated from university, I found a job, and in principle, I was already doing well. I even sorted out my housing. And in one of my conversations with my mother, she called me, congratulating me on the housewarming. She asked me how to help me. I said I needed a washing machine. She said, "Okay," but then she disappeared and was never heard from again. She didn't communicate with me for the next couple of months. She didn't get in touch with me. It's not about money, it's about attitude, about attention. At first, they made a situation where I couldn't rely on them, couldn't count on them, weren't interested, didn't try to share my difficulties, to support me. And then they started resenting the fact that we don't have such warm relationships, that I have my own thoughts and we don't communicate much. They think that I just need to grow up. They put it down to some kind of childishness, to the fact that I haven't grown up yet, and am acting like a teenager. In my opinion, the only way to preserve communication is for me to find a therapist and for my parents to find a therapist to work through this situation and study it thoroughly. I do not see a way out of this situation on my own. I do not feel the need for any kind of warmth. I have my own circle of people. I have my own family that will always support me, and I am sure of them. But at the same time, I understand that sooner or later, the time will come when we will have to have some kind of contact. I love my parents. I think that my parents also love me in a sense. But here, it seems to me, the problem of how they were brought up, the problem of their childhood, their psychological problems. My love is not unconditional either. I would also do well to work through this moment, to reflect on this state, to understand why I love them in a way that is not what they need. But in our culture, it is not customary to go to psychotherapists. Parents think that it is unnecessary. I think that if I don't work it out, then communication will stop altogether. So far over the years, I haven't been able to pick up the phone and cut off all contact. But we only call a few times a year on holidays. As a rule, it is a short formal conversation. Leela, 30, 8 years old, does not communicate with her mother for 1.5 years. I didn't talk to my mom for 1.5 years, and before that I had very minimal contact for 6 months. We couldn't talk normally. Even when she called me to visit, she would start nagging, snapping. She would start nagging, snapping. She would get sick. She would start freaking out. Even on the phone, none of our conversations could end. Almost normally. I have the whole set of psychosomatic illnesses that are typical of all children of abusive parents. At a certain point, when I had already started working with my brain, I began to realize that as soon as I saw a call from my mother, I just started having wild pains in my back. Abuse is some things both explainable and unexplainable. What society recognizes as violence is being thrown out into the entryway. Some slapping, some screaming. That's what I remember from the age of 5. She often had temper tantrums. As a child, I wondered if she really gave birth to me. To say that I didn't feel my mother's love is a very mild description. There was hatred. I remember myself from about the age of 1. Sobbing. No one came near me. I have 80 pictures in my album of me crying. My first memory is her teasing me for hours. I want to grab it, look at it, and she wouldn't let me. When she gave it to me, I had this feeling of anger at a young age. I broke that what? My mother used to play the victim, that she was pulling us, that she gave birth to us. She was a saint. You live with that and don't realize that something is wrong. I was a good student. I went to classes on my own. I had good relationships at school, at university, at work. Nevertheless, my mother convinced me that I was not normal. From the age of 13, you could tell the anger and rage increased. After the divorce, she began to have absolute power. She used to piss me off on every holiday. If it was a birthday party, she would drive me to such a state that I cried in front of my guests. For example, the hot meal was delayed for 15 minutes. In principle, it's nothing, but I was humiliated in the kitchen in front of a friend. There was some verbal abuse. There was a constant feeling that someone was hovering over you and was ready to hit you at any second. You are such a bastard, a disgrace, a shame, and so on. She might mutter something in front of my father, but she didn't beat me up much. One time I didn't have time to clean the apartment when she came home. I had a puppy and he was piling up behind a curtain somewhere, and I didn't see it. My mother came home early. She beat me and she beat my dog. I somehow got used to my own beatings, but beating my dog made me so horrified that I just raked up the puppy and went somewhere far away, didn't sleep at home. I was reproached all the time for being like my father's family, as if I could change that. My mother hated my grandmother. I could see the pain on her face when she noticed it. When I was 18, I decided it was time to split up, and then my mother changed her tactics. I still don't know what got into her. When I went abroad, she started calling me every day. She was affectionate, I thought. That's what my mother is like. Worried, probably just strict, but loves me very much. Abusive parents freak out when you become free. Because a joyful person is relaxed and it is something negative, they make you feel guilty. Eventually, you get used to not being happy yourself or not showing your joy. I even started hiding when I started doing something, some hobby, so I wouldn't be told anything, because it was like some kind of hypnosis. My mother controlled my leisure time. Come and weed my vegetable garden. Everybody's kids are like kids, and you freaks don't help. As soon as I made some progress, she would get anxious. Of course, there are kind of good moments. Some night where you can talk even if you've been shat on a little bit. Kind of like, okay, we're related. It's like having a cake and putting a little potassium cyanide in it. For 6 months, I minimized communication. Then I went to therapy. When I was told not to communicate with my mother, I thought that a year was okay, but 5 years was a long time. The penultimate time we met, she hit me on the head. At that moment, my mother was doing my hair and wanted to spray it with nail polish. I'm allergic, so I told her my head would itch and I shouldn't do it. But she wasn't interested, and I insisted on doing it. And then I got hit on the head with all my might. I was not even angry. I realized that this marginalization is over the line and the strength to forgive no more. I just said, that's it, I'm out of here. I don't know how she reacted to me cutting off communication because I blocked her completely right away. I didn't want to cut off her communication with my child at first, but I still decided it was for the best. My therapist diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder. It's like war veterans, though so many people who grew up with toxic parents have this diagnosis. And I didn't initially have much faith in her that my health and affairs would improve if I stopped communicating with my mother. After I stopped communicating, even my hormones started to come back to normal. A year went by, I was getting better and better. My nerves, my health were starting to come back to normal. Gradually, a picture began to emerge of what was happening to me. I could feel that some poison was gradually coming out of me, in some doses, as if this dysfunction was peeling away. My brain was rebuilding. Technically, you can communicate again, but it's toxic parenting. It's at the level of reflexes. The mother, her voice, her look, some intonation. They can have a depressing effect on a person. I already perceive her as a stranger. She's basically always been a stranger to me. It just has to be accepted as a disaster. There are people whose parents died in an accident. There's nothing you can do about it. If we happen to meet, I'll take her as any other woman in the street. No, I won't. I have nothing to talk about. I don't want to say anything anymore. I still have the feeling of someone who got out of prison after 20 years. I look at healthy people, how they live. I begin to painfully learn, one step at a time, how normal people live. After separation, it happens that the image of the mother is stratified, because there are both negative and positive moments. She cooked something, invited me to dinner, bought something beautiful. There is still a longing for glimpses, but I realize that this has nothing to do with the real person. I have a closed need for parental love because I understand that this connection will never happen again.